Until the 29th of December, this channel is proudly sponsored by HelloFresh UK. You can get discounts on fresh recipes and meal kits delivered to your door. You can use the code down in the description at checkout or the link down there as well, and you'll get 50% off your first box and 35% off the 3 after. Hello and welcome along to more Championship score predictions from the Honest Football Podcast. It's Matchday 23 this weekend, and for most sides it's the halfway point in the season and the final fixture before Christmas. A Boxing Day edition to come soon with one more rearranged fixture in the meantime, but today we're going to have a look at all the weekend action and see what scores we're predicting across the board. Of course though, first we've got to reflect on the first weekend back following the World Cup break for 4 weeks. Let's have a quick recap of how I got on and how you guys did in the comments, because for me, just the one perfect score, and it was my team, unfortunately. I predicted defeat for Luton Town at Middlesbrough, and in the 91st minute, that result was proven right. 3 other perfect outcomes give me 6 points overall, but a big shout out to W&G fan down in the comments, one of our regulars, 9 points for them. 3 perfect outcomes, the same perfect score on Middlesbrough Luton, but also correctly predicted Kolo Touré's first game in charge, a 1-1 draw for Wigan away at Millwall. But that's all in the past now. The games are going to start coming thick and fast very soon. The January transfer window's not far away, so let's kick off Matchday 23 with some Friday night football. It's a side that are quite often there on a Friday night. Birmingham City had a few games there already this year with mixed levels of success. They are at home to a Reading side who did very well at the weekend too. But let's start with Birmingham, who were away at Blackpool. A 0-0 draw for them. A game that on paper looked pretty poor. Only one shot on target. Not an awful lot going on. You would be forgiven for expecting this to have been like a normal Birmingham away game, where they have generally tried to be very solid, defend very deep this season, and managed to pick up a number of results in doing so. However, that doesn't really accurately reflect this one, because Birmingham had 3 official clear-cut chances, some great opportunities to win the game on the break, and let's be honest, they probably should have taken at least one of them. They come out with a 1 or 2-0 away win, you would have called it the perfect result. So I don't think Birmingham fans will panic. I'm very pleased with the way John Eustace has set that side up. To be in mid-table, given where many expected them to be, is a very good achievement, and they continue to look very good. Reading, on the other hand, what a performance at home. Another one of those gritty 1-0 wins where they absorbed a lot of pressure, didn't have a great deal of the ball, but they played to their strengths. And Paul Ince, you've got to say it, to have them in 8th place, it's a fabulous start to the season. It's not even a start now, is it? It's the halfway point. And with this break, a lot of those more experienced players have had the chance to recuperate, have had the chance to reset, and with a week between fixtures for the next couple of weeks, they've got a chance to come and build again. Having said that, they have been very poor away from home this season. 3rd worst record in the division, only 10 points from their 11 away matches. So most of their success has been based on their home form. But I do kind of fancy them to get something out of this. I think they'll defend deep. Birmingham won't have that space to exploit in behind. And maybe a set piece or something can nick them a result. So as much as it went wrong for me at the start of last weekend, I'm going to predict a 1-1 and start with the Championship's favourite scoreline. Let's move on to Saturday, where there's no early kickoff, so we start with the 3 o'clocks. It is Bristol City versus Stoke City. Bristol City with a fabulous 3-1 away win on their return at Rotherham. Soaked up again, didn't have much of the ball, played on the counter-attack and did it really well. They looked a huge threat, and we've said it for a lot of the season. They've got a massive goal-scoring threat. The defensive record has always been the problem for Bristol City. One of very few sides this season to have conceded 30 goals. But when they're at their best going forward, they are very hard to stop. And add that to Stoke's defensive frailties, who in a 2-2 draw against Cardiff, gotta say, I didn't expect that to be one of the thrillers of the weekend. But after falling behind early on, showing great determination to come back and get 2 goals in the first 20 minutes, to then throw away a lead in position again, it is starting to become a concern. And for Stoke and Cardiff at the weekends, they were neck and neck just above that relegation zone. So one of them really would have liked to pick up a result. For Bristol City, this game probably determines whether they go into the Christmas period thinking about relegation or looking up at the playoffs, because at the moment, 3 points clear of the bottom 3, 7 points off the playoffs, and that can obviously change drastically with a win this weekend. So I'm going to go for a bit of a surprise in this one, because Bristol City, we've said it before, they're quite inconsistent. They don't always put 2 good performances together in a row. So I'm going to go for Bristol City 1, Stoke 2. On to 2 of the form teams in the division as leaders Burnley face flying Middlesbrough. Under Michael Carrick, Middlesbrough made it 3 wins in a row with a last-minute winner against 10-man Luton, and Burnley were absolutely brilliant against managerless QPR. It's got to be said, firstly looking at Borough as a Luton fan, they dominated the match. Luton scored a fabulous individual goal, but for the most part Middlesbrough looked as they did in the previous few games. We talked about it in that manager special with Michael Carrick. I just thought it was the right fit at the right time for the club. So far the evidence is suggesting that, and if he can add 1 or 2 young loan players in January, people who can really make things happen going forward, I could see them potentially blowing teams away later in the year. Darragh Lenihan looked really solid at centre-half. That little bit of experience is going to be crucial for them too. But overall, I've been so impressed with Borough since Michael Carrick took charge. And quite frankly, you can copy and paste that and say it for the whole season with Burnley under Vincent Kompany. They picked up exactly where they left off, and if you take away that absolute mauling by Sheffield United, they've just been brilliant. 3-0 against Blackburn in a derby just before the break, and then a 3-0 win at QPR just after it. They picked up where they left off, they looked a real threat, they scored some great goals in there as well, and they created so many good chances, which is what a great side does, and maybe, when they were drawing those games earlier in the season, what they weren't doing as much as they could have been. So Burnley's starting to look the complete package. They're unbeaten at home this year, but Middlesbrough is going to form a really tricky test. There's part of me that thinks they might be able to nick this Borough. I do think it's going to be a brilliant game. I hope they don't try and cancel each other out. I think I'm going to go for a draw. Burnley have had a few of them this year. I'm going to go for a great game for the neutral. And if you're nearby in the area, that's the game to go to. Burnley 2, Middlesbrough 2. And next up, two sides' results who we've briefly mentioned already is Cardiff City versus Blackpool. Blackpool, of course, struggled to a 0-0 against Birmingham. No shot on target, 1 goal in their last 5 league games now. I'm really starting to worry about Blackpool. I said it at the start of the season, I didn't think they'd be able to stay up. They did do a little better than I expected under Appleton initially. But to get to the end of October and not win a game since, and I know they've had a couple of tough games in there, but they have played some of their relegation rivals too. Wigan expected to be down there and are still 1 place above them. West Brom had found themselves down there, as had Borough and Birmingham, and have not managed to pick up any wins there. So a little bit concerned about Blackpool at the minute. I'll be honest, I don't think January can come soon enough for them. But they are up against a side who they maybe expect to look at getting a result against this weekend. Cardiff City probably expected to be down there in 20th place at the moment. Of course, if Blackpool can nick a win in this game, they'll be above them in the league and out of that relegation zone. Of course, Cardiff did well to come back and get a point against Stoke after taking that early lead and then falling behind. Callum Robinson again popping up with a crucial goal, but that's 1 win in 5 for them now as well, which was that snuck victory away at Sunderland. And you just feel, so often this season, if Cardiff concede the first goal, even if they end up scoring, they're not going to win the game. Most of their success has been 1-0 wins, and even their last 2 victories in the league, a 1-0 at Sunderland, a 1-0 at home to Rotherham. Given Blackpool's lack of goals, I think 1 goal could be enough for Cardiff, and as they've managed that at home a few times this year, combined with Blackpool not winning away since the Coventry game, I'm going to go for a 1-0 Cardiff win. It's the safe prediction, but I'm not sure it's a good one. We'll wait and see. And up next is a game that thankfully will be played at the CBS Arena. It's Coventry City versus Swansea City. Coventry thankfully have now got a stadium to play until the end of the year, but they've got a big problem on the pitch because after 4 straight wins going into the World Cup break, they came back with a 1-0 defeat against Reading. Not the worst performance as we mentioned, but Reading were gritty and they were unable to break them down. So definitely a sign of concern for Coventry, albeit their home form has been impressive recently. Wins against the likes of Blackburn, Wigan and QPR, all without conceding, and even against Reading, they're letting 1 goal. They've been very solid at the back still. If they can win this game and then their midweek catch-up game at home as well, they could have one of the best home records in the league and they could be right up in that playoff mix as well. For Swansea, the winless run continues. A 1-0 defeat against Norwich makes it 6 without a win, 2 without a goal, and although they had looked a little better defensively the last couple of games, there are some real concerns for Russell Martin's side. It does seem to be the way with Swansea. We've mentioned it before. They have little spells where you think they're really going to go on a run, that they found their defensive form, they found their style of play, and then you just have a couple like this. 65% of the ball, but gave away a first-minute goal, which was crucial. Norwich were able to hang on to it quite comfortably, and although Swansea had bundles of shots, 17 in total, 7 on target managed as well, they probably, in fairness, only created 1 really good chance to get back into the game. So, although the stats make it look like Swansea were dominant, it's a story we've seen so many times. Lots of the ball, lots of shots, and a very low conversion rate. We've discussed it on here before. There's a stage where you feel that the style has to slightly give. And I don't mean in terms of just going long ball, but there's got to be a little bit more directness in some of that passing. For Swansea, though, it's 3 points off the playoffs now, and they're still in a pretty good position if they can end this winless run soon. So it's a tough game to predict. Coventry, always so good at home. Swansea, though, love a draw away from home. 5 of their 11 games so far. Coventry have only drawn 1 home game. It makes it impossible to predict. I'm going Coventry again. I do think they'll concede this time, though. 2-1, I'm going for the home side. And talking of games that don't suggest they're going to have many goals in them, Huddersfield Town are facing Watford. Huddersfield bottom of the league on 19 points, 6 from safety and starting to get cut adrift. They lost 1-0 to Sheffield United on their return at the weekend. And Watford, well, they started as they finished off. A 0-0 draw at home to Hull City. A pretty poor game if we're being brutally honest. They stay in 5th place, but it wasn't hugely inspiring going forward. Only 3 shots on target. It was a far more even game than I expected to see, and maybe that's credit to Liam Rossini and the job he's doing at Hull, but Watford would definitely be disappointed. The goal's just starting to dry up for them, but on the flip side, you could say they're starting to look a lot better at the back. So, depending on how Slaven Bilic views it, I think he'll be happy going into January just to be in that mix, but they're definitely losing ground to the top 2. That gap is now 7 points for automatic promotion. For Huddersfield, it's getting to the stage of, even though it's a very tough game on paper, it's getting towards must-win territory. They cannot afford to be that far behind. A 1-0 defeat against a very good Sheffield United side, by no means a disgrace. But after the 0-0 against Swansea, after 2 defeats in the last 3 before that game, it's just getting to the stage where points have to come in. Mark Fotheringham has yet to probably inspire since coming into the club. They've not really looked great from open play, albeit they've had a good set-piece threat at times. And in a Sheffield United game, 1 shot on target. And as good as they are, you're not going to get points if you don't create anything at all. So for me, this game is pretty simple to predict. I do think Watford will score sooner rather than later. Of course, it had only been a week since Ismaila Sarr had played at the World Cup, and Watford have had a few players missing at times. So I'm going to go for them to win this one. I don't think it'll be mad. I don't think it'll be a very big win, because Huddersfield are a bit better at home, but there's not often a lot of goals in those games. 11 matches at a John Smith so far, 10 goals scored, 10 goals conceded. Watford are going to get it in this one. 1-0, a classic away win. I'm predicting the Hornets to get the result. And next up, we've got that side who drew against Watford at the weekend. It's Hull City at home to Sunderland. Let's start at first with the Mackhams, who on Monday night were a little bit disappointed. Brilliant for an hour against West Brom. And we've seen a lot of times, actually, they've thrown away home leads this season. I thought the Stadium of Light was going to become a real fortress for them. But if anything, it's probably their away form that's been better. 4th best away team in the division, 5 wins away from home, and at home they've only managed to pick up 3, which would suggest for this weekend they've probably got a better chance of winning. But disappointment in the last 20 minutes in what was otherwise a thoroughly decent performance. In an even game, you'd probably have said a draw was a fair result, but West Brom were there to break Sunderland hearts. And Hull City, as I mentioned, a really solid effort away at Watford. Did have a few chances themselves, did create a little bit on the counter, but overall they'll be really happy with a point. Keeps them above the dotted line in 21st place, but they're going to need to start picking up results soon. We've talked about their defensive record prior to Rossini coming in. 39 goals conceded, by far the most in the division. I think Blackpool's the next most, 6 ahead of them. So I think that tells you just how welcome the clean sheet against Watford will be, and maybe those 4 weeks of work under the new manager starting to show off. Hull, awful at home, 4 wins, 7 defeats, no draws, the only result we're not going to get. And Sunderland, as I mentioned, one of the best away teams in the division. I don't know if it's going to be a different story under Rossini. I'm not going to predict it is. I'm going for 2-1 to the visitors. Next up, a side that had a very strong start to last weekend. What a return for Preston North End. They are at home to Neil Critchley's QPR. You can find that manager special from earlier in the week up in the eye above. But let's talk about Preston first, because it's very easy to put all the focus on QPR with a new manager coming in. But they were phenomenal. In the snow in a Lancashire derby. Forget the fact that Blackburn have got a terrible record in those derbies. They played brilliantly. They gave up possession. They played on the counter-attack. And they tore Blackburn to shreds. A 4-1 victory, created bundles of chances on the counter. And to be honest, it was a fabulous performance. We talked earlier in the season about Ryan Lowe's side. They had that ridiculously good defensive record, but they weren't really creating any chances at all. And we are now just starting to see that attacking fluidity's come into the game. And if they can keep scoring at the rate that they are, they are going to be a real threat. That win, of course, moved them up into the playoffs and just 2 points behind Blackburn, who they beat. But this is going to be a tricky one because most of the time this season, we've seen the new manager bounce in full effect. It's 5 defeats in 6 for QPR now. It's 1 goal in the last 6 games. And Burnley were not the side you wanted when your manager's just gone. A 3-0 defeat against them. It was just as heavy as Preston's win was, to be honest. They never looked like getting a result. They were thoroughly outplayed from start to finish. And I know the stats suggest 9 shots apiece, but Burnley's chances were far better and they deserved to win. But since then, Neil Critchley's come in, and he is a manager with proven championship pedigree. Did a brilliant job to bring Blackpool up and keep them up very comfortably last year. But this is going to be very tricky to turn around overnight. And to go to a side that have won 4 of their last 5, who have started scoring goals galore while largely keeping their defensive record intact, is probably not what they were hoping for. There is some solace though for QPR fans, which is Preston have got the best away record in the division, which is part of the reason they're up in 6th place. At home though, they've got the 5th worst, only 3 wins and 13 points from their 11 games, and they are still the lowest scorers at home with just 7. They lost their last home game just before the international break. That was at Deepdale against Millwall, of course. And QPR, away from home, have been a threat at times. So if Neil Critchley can get it right, he will get the new manager bounce. And you know what? I'm going to predict it against the odds. I'm going for Preston 0, QPR 2. And the final 3 p.m. kickoff on Saturday is West Bromwich Albion versus Rotherham United. Rotherham back into trouble again, a big defeat against Bristol City at home. Had a lot of the ball, created some chances, but just got wiped apart on the counter-attack. And that's going to be a big problem against the West Brom side, who have become incredibly solid under Carlos Corberán. We've talked about the new manager bounce. Take away that first game against a very good Sheffield United side, and West Brom have been excellent. Their first goal conceded in 4 against Sunderland, but they've won all of those games. And from being right in trouble, they're now 2 points clear and maybe looking up towards the playoffs again. For Rotherham, it's a chance for them to go back above West Brom. They're behind them on goal difference after last weekend's games. But I just can't see it. West Brom looks so solid under Carlos Corberán. They're starting to look like the Huddersfield side of last season, which is a worrying thought for the rest of the Championship. And with Daryl DK back and finding form, Tom Rogic, the late signing, coming in and showing some class, they're going to be a very tough side to stop. The playoffs is still not beyond bounds for the likes of West Brom and Middlesbrough after those manager changes, and I'm going to predict them to win it comfortably. I'm worried for Rotherham. I do still think they'll end up in the bottom 3, sadly. I'm going to go a comfortable win. 2-0 for the Baggies. And one more Saturday game is the 5:30 kickoff. It's at Carrow Road as Norwich City host Blackburn Rovers. Blackburn will be looking to put behind them 2 awful performances in Lancashire derbies. The 3-0 defeat at Burnley before the World Cup and the 4-1 home defeat to Preston last weekend. Completely destroyed on the counter by both sides. And Blackburn starting to look over their shoulders a bit. I know they're still in 3rd place, but they're only 4 points clear of 7th now, and their goal difference is actually negative, which is absolutely remarkable for a side in 3rd place after half the season. They've only scored 25 goals this year, which you could argue is their biggest concern, but to have let in 26 is the worst in the top 6, and they have had some very poor days at the office. Remarkably also still yet to draw a game, which does tell you a result I won't be predicting this weekend. I can't see it coming, and to be honest, I'm starting to worry there's a bad run round the corner. We saw it some years under Tony Mowbray. It was the stage of the season where they started to fall away. They did go on those long, poorer runs. And with Norwich starting to pick up results again without looking completely spectacular, it seems Dean Smith has sort of ridden that little storm, and he's now in a pretty good position again. 3 wins out of 5 now, and the only defeat came in that game against brilliantly informed Middlesbrough. But a 1-0 win at Swansea, that first minute goal from Timu Pukki, and then they sat in and they defended really well in fairness. At home this year, they've been okay. I'm going to go for Norwich to nick it. I don't think it'll be convincing, but I'll have them to win it by 1-0 because Blackburn have only scored 7 away goals all season. And on to Sunday, the earliest kickoff we've seen of the season so far. Thanks, Sky. It's Luton Town versus Millwall. 11:30 a.m. kickoff on the same day as the World Cup final. How about football being for the fans, eh? Luton unfortunately lost in the last minute against Middlesbrough. They had a man sent off in that game, which will lead to more problems we'll talk about in a minute. And Millwall were held by Kolo Touré's Wigan. Again, Fleming amongst the goals though for Millwall. He's starting to look a real superstar. We highlighted him in the pre-season prediction show, saying that we didn't think they'd miss Jeff Wallace that much purely because of him. And although it was a little bit disappointing for Millwall, they probably created enough chances to win it. They probably should have with one of the chances they had. But they are just outside the playoffs. They're right in that mix. And given the start to the season they had, which was a little bit uninspiring, they're staying up there and they're not losing many games. It was almost more important their performance was good after what happened against Sunderland the week before. And obviously, 3 games unbeaten prior to that. A lot of draws for them in recent weeks. And they're just starting to find that unbeaten run. So they're going to be formidable opposition. And Luton Town, under Rob Edwards for the first time, it started so well. Let's be fair, Middlesbrough were by far the better side. And a wonderful individual goal from Jordan Clark, one of the best goals of the weekend. That gave Luton an opportunity. But what they couldn't afford, with all the defensive injuries, already one of the wing-backs playing at centre-half, is another defensive player out. Amari Bell sent off with 20 minutes to go, and if none of the other lads are back, it might even have to be a change of shape to a back 4, or potentially we're talking about another midfielder coming into the defence. So that's going to be a bit of a dilemma for Sunday morning for Luton Town. Add to that Millwall are a formidable side. Add to that these two always seem to draw 1-1 whenever they're on TV. I'm going to go for the safe bet. Luton Town 1, Millwall 1. You won't blame me for picking a Championship's favourite scoreline. And the final game on Monday night is Wigan Athletic, managed by Kolo Touré for the first time at home against Sheffield United, who are back up in that top 2. The Blades started with a 1-0 win against Huddersfield, started the way they left off against Cardiff. Another really solid display, looking good at the back, got the best defensive record in the league with just 19 conceded. That's alongside Coventry, who have played 2 games less, and they're up in that second place by 5 points now. They were, of course, my pre-season title favourites. I've not seen too much to deter me from that. I did think they'd be a bit more of a threat going forward. They've got goals in so many different places. But at the moment, they're keeping clean sheets, they're winning games, and that's 5 out of 6 now. If you ignore the brilliant game against Burnley, where they wiped the floor with them in a 5-2 victory, all their other wins have been 1 or 2-0. So Sheffield United looking very solid. I've got no doubts they'll be in that top 2 come the end of the year. But Wigan is an interesting one. Under Kolo Touré, they looked very solid against Millwall. They kept the ball a lot better, which was quite interesting. And against a very tricky Millwall side who are famously good at home, a 1-1 draw is pretty commendable. Yes, Millwall had a couple of good chances to win the game, but Wigan having more of the ball. I'll be interested to see if they can do that against Sheffield United. And I'll be really interested to see what Kolo Touré can do at home, because it has largely been a big mental block for Wigan this year. They've got the worst home record in the league, just 9 points and 2 victories with 8 goals scored and 18 conceded. Sheffield United, by contrast, least goals conceded away from home, second best away record in the league after Preston, and 6 wins from their 11. It's very hard to go against Sheffield United. We do have the unknown factor of what Kolo Touré will do, but I'm going to stick my neck on the line and say it's not going to be enough. He can't work miracles before the window. They still haven't got that big goal scoring threat in home games. They're good on the counter away. This will be a lot trickier. Sheffield United to win. 3-0 I'm going. I might end up looking ridiculous, but I've got to go for one big one this week. 3-0 Sheffield United. And let's have a quick recap of what I've predicted for Matchday 23. I think there's no doubt that the surprise of the weekend in my book, or the standout fixture, is Queen's Park Rangers getting a win in Neil Critchley's first game. Let's hope for their sake I'm right on the new manager bounce front. I've also gone for a surprise away win for Stoke City at Bristol City, perhaps for some, and a big win 3-0 Sheffield United, as well as an early morning draw on Sunday. Luton and Millwall playing out another 1-1. But those are my predictions for the weekend. Do you agree with them or disagree with them? Let me know in a comment section down there and give us your predictions for Matchday 23. Remember, if you do get a better score than me over the weekend, I will give you a shout out in the next full episode. If you did enjoy this episode, please do chuck a thumbs up on it. Subscribe for regular content from the Honest Football Podcast. We'll be back with the mini predictions for the Coventry game in midweek, and then a big one ahead of the Boxing Day fixtures. Thank you to HelloFresh for sponsoring. Check out the link for that down in the description. And finally, you can support the show as a channel member by clicking the join button down below.